Hello guys. Tonight I'm going to tell you why gladiators' last meal before a fight was always a feast. But before we begin, if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hitting the like button below the video costs you nothing, and even writing "watched it" in the comments helps this channel grow in an incredible way. Okay? Thank you so much. Now get into a comfortable position, fix your pillow, turn off the lights, because tonight we're going back 2,000 years, and let's start in 264 BC. About 2,300 years ago, Rome is not yet the center of the world, just a loud growing city in Italy. And that year, a man named Junius Brutus Pera does something unusual at his father's funeral to express his grief and respect. He has 3 pairs of slaves fight each other, yes, fight, at a funeral. A fight is happening at a funeral ceremony. And think of it this way. In modern times, someone might say, "My father loved football. Let's organize a match in his honor." But Romans said, "My father was a warrior. Let men kill each other in his memory." Different cultures, different mourning rituals. And from that small funeral fight, those 3 pairs, over centuries, the greatest entertainment industry of an entire empire was born. But to understand gladiators, you first need to understand that world. Sink your head a little deeper into your pillow and imagine Rome in the 2nd century, AD, a city of more than 1 million people. Compare it to Istanbul today, and Rome back then was probably even more crowded. Every street filled with noise, wooden-wheeled carts grinding over stone, vendors shouting, a sharp smell rising from leather tanneries. We modern people have perfume, deodorant, soap, but none of that exists on the streets of ancient Rome. The city smells of fresh bread, burning wood, and urine. Yes, urine, because urine was used to wash clothes. And on every corner, an animal, a dog, a mule, an ox. And think about what they left behind on those streets. And think about walking on cobblestones in sandals. Those stones aren't smooth. They're rough and hard. And if it rained in the morning, wet and slippery, and people's clothes aren't soft cotton, they're made of wool, slightly scratchy, clinging to the body, heavy fabric that soaks up sweat in summer. And walking among these people is one of Rome's most complex figures, the gladiator. And now I need to tell you something that might not be what you expected. The vast majority of gladiators did not die during combat, at least not in the 1st and 2nd centuries. AD, popular culture, tells us every fight ended in death. But the reality is different because training a gladiator was enormously expensive. Much like investing in a Formula 1 driver today. You spend years giving this man money, food, trainers, equipment, and then you kill him on someone's hand gesture. No, that doesn't make sense. A good gladiator was an editor's, meaning the game's organizer's most valuable asset. And death was genuinely not something desired most of the time. Of course, this wasn't always the case. Sometimes the crowd wanted blood. Sometimes political spectacles required death. But in an average fight, both sides could walk out of the arena alive. And keep this truth in mind because it lies at the very heart of the story I'm telling tonight. So how did a man become a gladiator? There were 3 paths. The first was being a prisoner of war. You were captured in battle, brought to Rome with your hands bound, and given 2 choices: work as a slave in the fields or fight in the arena. The second path was committing a crime. The punishment for serious crimes was sometimes the arena. The third and perhaps most fascinating path was volunteering. Yes, some people became gladiators by choice. Why? For money, for fame, to escape their debts. And this tells us something. For some people in that era, gladiatorship was like taking a dangerous job today. Maybe like a coal miner, maybe like a deep-sea fisherman. dangerous but a source of income. And these volunteers were called auctorati. They signed contracts, received a set amount of money, and in return, put their bodies and lives at risk under certain conditions. Now think about a gladiator's training life. They went to schools called ludi. These resembled our modern sports academies, but of course with less Wi-Fi and more chains. The most famous one was in Capua, the very place where Spartacus's rebellion broke out in 73 BC, that famous uprising, but we'll get to that in a moment. In these ludi, they woke up early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. In those hours, when the air was still cool and slightly damp, they trained with wooden swords, practiced strikes on the large wooden stakes called palace, and these exercises went on for hours, just like today's athletic training camps. Monotonous, repetitive, exhausting, morning training, afternoon training, evening training. And think about these men's bodies after 2 years of such training. A gladiator's physique was almost like a sculpture, but a different kind of sculpture, because when archaeologists examined the gladiator cemetery found in Ephesus, they discovered something interesting. The gladiators' bones contained high levels of calcium and strontium. What does this mean? It means gladiators ate a lot of grain and legumes, barley, lentils, beans, and this earned them the nickname hordearii, meaning barley men. Now isn't that a little funny? Rome's most feared warriors, the stars of the arena, the figures the public worshipped, and they were essentially eating a vegetarian diet, just like some elite athletes today. They drew their power from carbohydrates, but not only for power. This high carbohydrate diet built an extra layer of fat on their bodies, and this fat layer was actually a tactical advantage, because a surface cut had to pass through this layer before reaching the organs. Ingenious, right? They weren't calculating this scientifically, of course, but they had discovered it through centuries of experience. Now come, let's get to the feast, because the night before the fight was truly something special. It was called the Cena Libera, the free meal, the public dinner, and this evening meal carried many layers of meaning for both gladiators and the public. Think about it. You are a gladiator. Tomorrow morning, you will enter the arena. Maybe you'll survive, maybe you won't, and tonight they are serving you Rome's finest foods. Fresh bread, olive oil, salted cheese, roasted pork, wine sweetened with honey, fresh figs, and you eat all of this in an open space visible to the public, because this meal was special. The public could watch. People would come and observe you, just like a pre-match press conference today, but far more dramatic, far more human. And what did you feel at this meal? Perhaps you chewed slowly, not from hunger, but from lack of appetite. Or perhaps the opposite. Your brain protecting you by making everything feel incredibly vivid. The softness of the bread, the warmth of the wine in your throat, the sweetness of the figs. And people were watching you, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some already impatiently looking forward to tomorrow. And this meal had another dimension. If someone knew a gladiator, a friend, a relative, they could come and say goodbye that evening, because everyone knew this might be the last meal. Maybe it wasn't, but maybe it was. And this uncertainty gnawed at people from the inside. But now I want to pause at this point and tell you about Spartacus, because his story shows this Cena Libera tradition in a very different light. Spartacus was born around 109 BC in Thrace, from the Balkan region, strong, intelligent, and somehow fell into Rome's hands. First a soldier, then a prisoner, then a gladiator, sent to that ludus in Capua, and in 73 BC he escaped with about 78 men using kitchen knives. Yes, kitchen knives, because they had no other weapons. And this small group took refuge on Mount Vesuvius. And over time, this group grew. Peasants joined, escaped slaves joined, and eventually became an army of hundreds of thousands, nearly bringing Rome to its knees for 2 years. This is one of history's greatest slave revolts, and think about this. Spartacus and his men had experienced the Sina Libera, had sat at those meals, eaten that bread, drunk that wine, and one day he said enough, and took those kitchen knives. Now what does that make you feel? How much a person can endure when they break? Perhaps there's something here to think about again tomorrow, but tonight just feel it and let it pass. Let your eyes grow a little heavier. Spartacus's story is beautiful but dark, and we haven't yet reached the very heart of the gladiators' last meal. Now let's go there, to the real meaning of the Sina Libera. Why was this meal organized as a feast? There were several reasons. The first was practical. A well-fed gladiator fought better. The fight was a show and the audience had paid. Nobody wanted to watch a terrible fight. So the editor's interest was in putting on a good show. And for a good show, the gladiators needed to be full and strong. The second reason was more human and more dark. This meal was meant to win the public's sympathy, because gladiators weren't just machines. They were people. And if the public saw them as people that fight, would be so much more exciting. Watching someone you know by name, whose face you've seen, whom you watched eating. That was completely different, just like today, when an athlete's life. Story is broadcast before a match. Once you know that story, you feel so much more intensely in the stands. And the third reason, perhaps the deepest of all. This meal was a kind of farewell ritual, society's final respect given to these men. Tomorrow you may die, but tonight you will eat the very best. This is an ancient human instinct, and we see it in many cultures around the world. Isn't a condemned prisoner's last meal also an extension of this tradition? In America today, they still ask an inmate on death row what they want to eat. 2,000 years have passed, and this ritual is still alive. Human psychology doesn't change. And now sit at that meal table in your mind. A wide hall made of stone, torchlight painting everything in yellow, trembling light. The walls slightly damp. The stone cold, but the steam rising from the food on the table warming the room. The man next to you is a prisoner of war brought from Gaul years ago. You don't quite know his name, but you recognize his face. You trained in the same courtyard every day, and tonight he is also silent, tearing his bread, but hardly eating. And you are also aware that tomorrow you might fight against him, or perhaps against a common enemy. You don't know. The editor hasn't announced the matchups yet, and you eat with this uncertainty. You chew, you swallow, and the wine helps a little. Think about the wine of that era, not like today's. Much more intense. Water is mixed into it because undiluted, it's too strong. Sometimes honey is added, sometimes spices, and this mixture settles into your stomach, warm, heavy, and your eyes grow a little heavy, just like your eyes right now. Let them grow heavy, breathe. Our story continues. Now let's talk about gladiator types, because this is also important for understanding the last meal. Not every gladiator was the same. There were different types using different weapons, different armor, different fighting styles. One of the most famous was the Murmillo, a heavily armored type carrying a large rectangular shield with a fish figure on his helmet. Another was the Retiarius, using a trident and net, almost no armor, fast and agile. And these two were often matched against each other because the contrast made for a great show. Heavy armored, slow, powerful man against light, armored, fast, agile man, just like a heavyweight boxer against a fast boxer. And the audience enjoyed this contrast. There was also the Thrax, the Thracian-style fighter, small shield and large curved sword. And this is the type Spartacus himself is believed to have been. And there was the secutor, the chaser, similar to the myrmidon but designed to fight specifically against the retiarius. His helmet was almost completely enclosed, so the net couldn't catch it. And why does knowing these types matter? Because every man sitting at the Scena Libera represented one of these types. And this was their identity. Just like a position in today's sports. Are you a goalkeeper or a forward? It matters to me. I know how to watch you. And those sitting at that table that night each carried their own identity. They didn't have their armor there, of course, but everyone knew who they were, what weapon they would use, what tactic they would fight with, and this knowledge both empowered and frightened. Because if you are a retiarius and tomorrow you'll face a secutor, you already know you can't catch that helmet in your net, and your job will be much harder. And while you're running these calculations in your head, you eat, and at the other end of the table, perhaps a doctor, meaning a gladiator trainer, is sitting, watching too, noticing who is eating well, who is eating little, whose eyes are hollow because the doctor was both trainer and psychologist and father figure. He had trained these men for years, and tonight he is assessing them once more. Now these doctors had another interesting characteristic. Medical care in gladiator schools was taken extremely seriously. And now I need to tell you about ancient Roman medicine, because this is both fascinating and a little spine-chilling. The famous physician Galen, one of the most important doctors of the 2nd century AD, worked for a gladiator school in Pergamon, modern-day Bergama, for a period of his career. And what he learned from these gladiators shaped the history of medicine. While treating wounds, Galen observed the inner structure of the human body, nerves, muscles, organs, because in that era, anatomical study on human cadavers was forbidden, and gladiator wounds provided a living anatomy lesson. And isn't that a little strange? The advancement of medicine was partly nourished by these people's suffering, and Galen's treatments were both clever and incredibly primitive by today's standards. Wine was used as an antiseptic. Herbal mixtures were applied, but surgery was performed, and this surgery was done without anesthesia. A mixture of opium and mandrakes slightly numbed, but didn't render a person fully unconscious, meaning the men could feel deep wounds being cleaned, could feel stitches being sewn. And think about this pain. You're lying on a stone table in torchlight. A man is putting his hand inside your wound, and you're clenching your teeth, maybe screaming. And I remind you that the Scena Libera may have taken place the previous night. So a man in recovery might also be sitting at that table, bandage on his wound, but eating because he has to eat. And this feels very human to me. Even in pain you eat. You keep going. And now let's come to the aftermath of that meal. The meal ended, the tables were cleared, and the gladiators returned to their cells or dormitories. And how did this night pass? Did some manage to sleep? Did some stare at the ceiling until morning? Did some pray? The gladiators of Rome belonged to various religions. Some embraced traditional Roman religion. Some participated in the cult of Mithras. In later centuries, Christians were also thrown into the arena. But for gladiators in the 1st and 2nd centuries, a fatalistic philosophy generally prevailed. Do whatever you can today. Whatever happens tomorrow will happen. And isn't this philosophy actually the most suitable one for sleep? You've done everything you could. Let go of the rest, just like you having done everything you could today. Whatever happens tomorrow, right now, there is only this moment, and in this moment, there is a pillow under your head, a blanket over you, and far away, 2,000 years ago, a man is trying to sleep on a stone floor, maybe not as comfortable as you, but doing the same thing, trying to close his eyes, and he sleeps until morning, or he doesn't. And in the morning, the doors open, The sun comes in, and that corridor begins. The pompa, the procession. When gladiators walked into the arena accompanied by music, tubicines playing trumpets, cornicines playing horns, and this music spread through the streets of Rome in the early morning hours, and people heard it and knew that today there were games, and the Colosseum was full, 50,000 people. Some estimates say 80,000. And these people came from early morning, food and drink vendors waiting outside, the smell of grilled meat, fresh bread, wine, and people took their seats according to social class. Senators in the front, common people in the middle and back, women in separate sections, and if the emperor was present, his own private box. And while these people waited, they talked among themselves. Who do you think will win? I saw that Thracian at the Sina Libera last night. He had no appetite, bad sign. And there the Sina Libera comes into play again. The public watched that meal, and now they're making their own predictions. And inside, the gladiators are getting ready, putting on their armor, and this ritual of putting on armor is also interesting. Iron pieces placed one by one, every buckle fastened, every strap tightened, and this process takes maybe 15-20 minutes. And what are you thinking during that time? Technical things, how you'll fight, or are you remembering the taste of the fig at the Sina Libera table, and then the doors open, and you step out into the sun, and the sound of the crowd hits you like a wave, the sound of hands, the sound of feet, shouts, and you walk, and this entire story existed for this one step. But tonight, you don't have to take that step. You are just lying there, listening to the story, and your eyes grow a little heavier with every passing minute, and that is beautiful, very natural. Let them grow heavy. And I keep telling the story because our gladiator tale isn't over yet. Let's come to the fight itself a little, because the ritual of the fight was also part of that long farewell that began with the Sina Libera. The fight was generally conducted according to set rules. There were referees called summa rudis. Yes, referees, like a modern sporting contest. And these referees could intervene in the fight when a gladiator fell and dropped his shield to ask for mercy, meaning when he requested missio. The referee stepped in and the decision rested with the emperor or editor, and the crowd voted in a sense too, by raising or lowering their thumbs. But there's a myth here. We think thumb down meant death, but historians still debate this. What pollis verso, meaning turned thumb, actually meant is unclear. Perhaps a raised thumb meant death. Perhaps both meant different things depending on context. And isn't this ambiguity beautiful? A hand gesture debated for 2,000 years, and picture this scene, 50. 1,000 people holding their breath, and a man raises a finger, and that finger determines a life. So simple, so dramatic, and the winning man stands in the arena, tired, perhaps wounded, but standing, and the crowd goes wild. And that night, the winner will eat another meal, and perhaps this time with real appetite. And the loser, if pardoned, will return to his own bed, and his wounds will be bandaged, and perhaps a week later he will sit at another Sina Libera table. And this cycle went on like this for weeks, months, years, and some gladiators became truly famous. Just like today's sports stars, their images were drawn on walls. Women admired them. Writings were written. Archaeologists found gladiator graffiti on the walls of Pompeii. Celadus, the man women long for, this inscription from the 1st century AD on that wall for 2,000 years. And this tells me so much. Human nature doesn't change. We still admire handsome athletes. We still look up to winners. We still want excitement. And at the beginning of that excitement was that meal, the Sina Libera, the free meal, the last maybe the first meal. And now let me make you think about the symbolic dimension of this meal. For just a moment, only feel it. Every morning when you wake up, there is a kind of new beginning. And every evening, when you lie down to sleep, there is also a closing. Gladiators experienced this closing far more intensely. Every night before a fight was truly a possible closing for them. And that's why they lived that meal fully. The softness of the bread, the warmth of the wine, the silence of the man beside them. And maybe you too, think for a second about what you ate today. What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? Did you eat tonight? And did you truly taste it? Or did you eat while looking at your phone? Gladiators ate without phones, without distractions, fully living that meal. And that is perhaps the quietest lesson they left us. Now close your eyes a little more and imagine that table, torchlight, the coldness of the stone, the smell of the bread, the warmth of the wine, and a heavy silence. Everyone in their own world, everyone alone with their own calculations. And this silence wraps around you too, just like a blanket wraps around you, warm and heavy and comforting. And the sounds fade away. The arena fades away. The Colosseum fades away. Rome fades away. And only you remain, buried in your pillow, eyes closed, on the last page of a 2,000-year-old story. Sleep tonight, gladiator. Whatever happens tomorrow, sleep tonight. And if listening to this story did you good, don't forget that you subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button below the video and write only Sina Libera in the comments section. I want to see how many people spent this night with me. Good night.